how to think about motivation. We'll think about it from the hypothalamic perspective. So we could say one thing that motivation does is set goals. And we could say that emotions track progress towards goals. And I'm going to use that schema even though it's not exactly right. So you say, well, motivation determines where you're going to aim. So if you're hungry, you're going to aim at something to eat. And then that will organize your perceptions so that you zero out everything that isn't relevant to that task, which is almost everything. You concentrate on those few things that are going to facilitate your movement forward. When you encounter those things, that produces positive emotion as you move through the world towards your goal, and you see that things are laying themselves out that facilitate your movement forward. Those things cause positive emotion. And if you encounter anything that gets in the way, then that produces negative emotion, and it can be like threat, because you're not supposed to encounter something that gets in the way. It can be anger, so that you move it away. It can be frustration, disappointment, grief. Those would, if you had a response that serious to an obstacle, it would probably punish the little motivated frame right out of existence. You know, so you walk downstairs and, I don't know, the contracting company has set a wrecking ball through your kitchen. It's like, that's going to be disappointing. You're not going to keep eating the peanut butter sandwich in the rubble. That little frame is going to get punished out of existence, and some new goal is going to pop up instead. And, you know, one of the things we're going to try to sort out is how do you decide when you've encountered an obstacle that's so big that you should just quit and go do something else? Because that's not obvious. You know, and you can get into counterproductive persistence pretty easily. So we don't know how people solve that problem. It's a really complicated one. So anyways, we're going to work on that scenario. Your hypothalamus pops up micro goals that are directly relevant to biological survival. That produces a frame of reference. So it's not a goal, it's not a drive, and it's not a collection of behaviors. It's a little personality. And the personality has a viewpoint, it has thoughts that go along with it. It has perceptions, it has action tendencies, all of that. You can see this in addiction, most particularly. So one of the things that you find often with people who are alcoholic is they lie all the time. And that's because when they've built a little alcohol-dependent personality inside of themselves, or a big one, maybe it's 90% of their personality, and one of the things that consists of is all the rationalizations that they've used over the years to justify their addiction to themselves and to other people. And so the addiction has a personality, you know, and so when the person is off, or maybe they're addicted to meth or something like that, where, you know, the addiction is more, it's more short-term powerful, than I would say, than an alcohol addiction. They'll say anything. And the words are just tools used to get towards the goal. And if they happen to be deceptive, whatever, it doesn't matter. They're just practical tools to get towards the goal. And then when you get towards the goal and you take a nice shot of meth or something like that, you reinforce all those rationales that you use to get the drug, and then the next time you're even a better deceiver and liar. So, okay, so we're going to say motivations, one way of thinking about it is they set goals, but it's not the right way of thinking about it. They produce a whole framework of interpretation. And so we're going to think about that framework of interpretation. And then emotions emerge inside of that. So that's it. So the world is framed, motivation set goals. You could say the world has to be framed. So motivation sets that frame, goals, emotions, perceptions, and actions. And then actions track progress. So positive emotion says you're moving forward properly towards your goal. And if you encounter something you don't expect, you stop. That's anxiety. It's like, oh, we're not where we thought we were. And so we don't know what to do. So we should stop because we don't know where we are or what we're doing. Stop, frozen. And then the more powerful negative emotions like pain, they might make you get out of there. So emotions, forward, stop, reverse. That's your emotions within that motivated frame. So, and that's another example of how your mind is embedded in your body. You know, emotions are like they're offshoots of action tendencies. That's the right way to think about it, because action is everything fundamentally. So what are some basic motivations? Most of these are regulated by the hypothalamus, by the way, and that tells you just how important a control system it is. The other thing that's useful to know about the hypothalamus is that it has projections going up from it that are like tree trunks, and inhibitory projections coming down that are like grapevines. So you can kind of control your hypothalamus as long as it's not on too much. But if it's on in any serious way, it's like it wins. So partly what you do to stop yourself from falling under the dominion of your hypothalamus is to never ever be anywhere where its action is necessary. right? You don't want to go into a biker bar because you might find yourself in a situation where panicked defensive aggression is immediately necessary. You probably don't want that. You don't want the panic. You don't want the terror. You don't want the frenzied fight. You don't want any of that. You don't want to have to run away in absolute panic. So you just don't go there. And a huge part of how we regulate our emotions is just by never going anywhere where we have to experience them. And so that has very little to do with internal inhibitory control and everything to do with staying where you belong. The Myth of Mental Illness by Thomas Szasz, S-Z-A-S-Z. It's a classic. You should read it. If you're interested in psychology, read it. Like, it's a classic. And he basically said, most people have problems in living. They don't have psychological problems. And so I've experienced, despite my love for the psychoanalysts, very frequently what I'm doing as a therapist is helping people have a life that would work. You know, and you can parameterize that. It's like, what do you need? How about some friends? That people kind of like that. How about an intimate relationship with someone that you can trust, that maybe has a future? That'd be good. How about a career that puts you in a dominance hierarchy somewhere, so at least you've got some possibility of rising, some possibility of stabilizing yourself, and a schedule and a routine, because no one can live without a routine. You just forget that. If you guys don't have a routine, I would recommend, like, you get one going, because you cannot be mentally healthy without a routine. You need to pick a time to get up, whatever time you want, but pick one and stick to it, because otherwise you dysregulate your circadian rhythms and they regulate your mood. And eat something in the morning. I've had lots of clients who've had anxiety disorders. I had one client who was literally starving. Very smart girl. There was very little that she liked. She kind of tried to subsist on like half a cup of rice a day. She came to me and said, I have no energy. I come home, all I want to do is watch the same movie over and over. What, like, is that weird? And I thought, well, it depends on how hard you work. You know, it's a little weird, but whatever. It's familiar. You're looking for comfort. So I did an analysis of her diet. It's like 3/4 of a cup of rice. It's like, you're starving. Eat something. You know, you'll feel better. So she modified her diet and all her anxiety went away and she had some energy. It's like, yeah, you got to eat. So a schedule, that's a good thing, man. Your brain will thank you for it. It will stabilize your nervous system. With a bit of a plan, that's a good thing. You need a career. You need something productive to do with your time. You need to regulate your use of drugs and alcohol, most particularly alcohol, because that does in a lot of people. You need a family, like the family you have, your parents and all that. It'd be nice if you all got along. You could work on that. That's a good thing to work on. And then, you know, you probably need children at some point. And that's life. That's what life is. And if you're missing, you know, you may have a good reason to not be operating on one of those dimensions. It's not mandatory. But I can tell you that if you're not operating reasonably well on 4, I think I mentioned 6, if you're not operating reasonably well on at least 3 of them, there's no way you're going to be psychologically thriving. And that's more pragmatic in some sense than psychological, right? Human beings have a nature. There's things we need. And if we have them, well, that's good. And if we don't have them, well, then we feel the lack. And so behaviorists, behavioral psychologists concentrate a lot more on that sort of thing. You know, it's practical. It's like strategizing. Make a career plan. Figure out how to negotiate, because that's bloody important. Figure out how to say what you need. Figure out how to tell the truth to people. Figure out how to listen to your partner in particular, because if you listen to them, they will actually tell you what they want. And sometimes you can give it to them, and maybe they'll return the favor. And if you practice that for like 15 years, well, then maybe you're constantly giving each other what you want. Well, hooray, that would be good. And then there's 2 of you under most circumstances, and it's better to have 2 brains than 1, because people think differently because of their temperament mostly. And so the negotiation is where the wisdom arises, and it's part of the transformation, the psychological transformation that's attendant on an intimate relationship, and one of the fundamental purposes of a long-term intimate relationship. You cite a tired brain, foggy thinking, as the reason to stop answering questions or giving a talk. How do you combat this while working or writing daily? Well, I eat a big breakfast relatively soon on waking. That really helps. If any of you out there are anxious, and many of you no doubt are, there'll be a large number of you who are anxious and don't eat breakfast. There'll be a whole bunch of you out there who think, well, I don't eat breakfast. It isn't necessary. It's like, that's wrong. It's necessary. You fasted all night. If you load yourself cognitively or physiologically in the morning, your brain, stressed, will encourage your body to produce insulin. It will take all the blood sugar out of your blood, and then you're done for the day. And then you'll be anxious. And a lot of the rest of you too, you'll find if you're anxious, try this. It's really, really interesting experiment. The next time you're anxious, go eat something. Eat some protein and fat would be best. You could have cheese and crackers. I'm not a big fan of carbohydrates, but whatever. Eat whatever you're willing to eat, but make it solid. Don't eat a peanut butter, or don't eat a chocolate bar or something sweet. Eat something substantial, a piece of meat, a piece of cheese, some peanut butter, something like that. And then wait 10 minutes and see if you're less anxious. And try that for like 2 weeks. Every time you get anxious, eat something. Because then you can find out if your anxiety is linked to low blood sugar. And it's very likely that it is, especially if you also get irritable and foggy in your thinking. And the best way to treat that, as far as I've been able to tell, and there's a decent literature on this, is to make sure that you eat a big breakfast. And you might say, well, I'm not hungry in the morning. It's like, who the hell cares if you're hungry? I didn't say enjoy your breakfast. I said eat it. That's not the same thing. There's lots of things that you need to do that you don't enjoy to begin with. You'll get hungry in 6 months, and then you'll start to enjoy it. So that's a massive difference. I take small naps quite frequently. If I'm wiped out, I'll go have a nap for 10 minutes or 15 minutes. And then that helps quite a lot. I try to wake up on a fairly regular schedule. That's another thing I would really recommend for people whose lives are in disarray and who are anxious. Try to fix your wake time. Going when you sleep, that's not so important. So you can still, stay up late and have fun and all that. But getting up in the morning is really helpful. So, and you also have to figure out how much you can work or write. I can't write for more than about my sustainable maximum for writing is 3 hours a day. And if I push it past that, then, especially if I'm editing, I make mistakes when I'm editing, so that's counterproductive, and I can't sustain it across time. And so I don't really think you can do more than about 3 hours of extremely intense intellectual work a day. Although if you have a nap, you can stretch that, but I think at least I end up paying for it across time. So nap, make sure you eat, and make sure that you get enough sleep. So that's how I combat it and try to make myself hyper efficient.
We were sitting in the first row of the plane, and do you remember the guy was a young black man, sort of ran onto the plane. He was wearing a yellow vest. He was a worker working the bridge or something. And he came up to you and he said, I'm not supposed to be on the plane right now. I'm not supposed to say anything, but you helped me turn my life around. I got this job because of you. And what I remember more than anything else is he had this huge smile on his face. But it wasn't because you told him to go out there and be happy. It was because you told him to go out there and fix some stuff. And I think that's exactly what you're talking about right now.
Those experiences are so life-sustaining. It's so remarkable to have that happen. And that's something I've been immensely privileged to constantly experience, although there's also something about it that's extremely painful. The magnitude of that joy is sort of proportional to the obstacles it had to overcome while it was attempting to manifest itself. And one of the things I'm sure you saw on the tour, and I don't know how this affected you, was the depth of hunger for encouragement that exists everywhere, as far as I can tell. And everyone wants to be appreciated when they bring their best to the table. That's why the current assault on merit is so unbelievably brutal, because it will deny everyone the right to be appreciated for being their best. And well, you might ask, well, when does the best become your enemy? And that's easy. It's when you flee from it. or how starting to clean up the room changed their life. That's quite fun because it's something I always tell people to do instead of going out and protesting. Jesus, I just can't stand
Cleaning up
that.
the room?
Yeah.
Meaning?
Well, my sense is that if you want to change the world, you start from yourself and work outward, because you build your competence that way. It's like, I don't know how you can go out and protest the structure of the entire economic system if you can't keep your room organized. Well, I made a video call, which was called Message to Millennials, where it was called How to Change the World Properly. A bit of on the pretentious side, I suppose, but I was trying to produce something that was a counterposition to this idea that what you should do is go out and fix up other people. You know, that's just not right. And there's a New Testament line about that, something about, you know, not worrying too much about the log in your neighbor's eye, or about the speck in your neighbor's eye when you have a log in your eye. What would the world be like if people stopped avoiding the things they knew they should do? You know, because the question is, how much are we contributing to the fact that life is an existential catastrophe and a tragedy? How much is our own corruption contributing to that? That's a really worthwhile question. The things you leave undone because you're angry, you're resentful, you're lazy, you have inertia. Well, you consult your conscience and it says, well, you know, that place over there could use a little work. It's the same as working on yourself, and so you clean that up because you can, and then things are a little clearer around you, and you're a little better off because you've practiced a bit, and so you're a little stronger, and then something else manifests itself and says, well, maybe you could like take a crack at fixing me up too. So you decide to do that, and then that gets a little bit more pristine, you know, and soon, and it's humble because you're not exceeding your domain of competence. You know, it's like, don't be fixing up the economy, 18-year-olds. You don't know anything about the economy. It's a massive, complex machine beyond anyone's understanding, and you mess with it at your peril. So, and can you even clean up your own room? No. Well, you should think about that. You should think about that. The truth of the matter is that you have a lot of potential as a child, but none of that is capable of manifesting itself as freedom before you become disciplined. And discipline is a matter of the imposition of order, and the order is necessary, especially for people who are hopeless and nihilistic. That it's not some casual self-help doctrine. It's that if you don't organize yourself properly, you'll pay for it, and in a big way, and so will the people around you. And I would say, start where you can start. You know, if something announces itself to you as in need of repair, that you could repair, then hey, fix it. You fix 100 things like that, your life will be a lot different. You know, I often tell people too, fix the things you repeat every day, because people tend to think of those as trivial. You get up, you brush your teeth, you have your breakfast, you know, you have your routines that you go through every day. Well, those probably constitute 50% of your life. And people think, well, they're mundane, I don't need to pay attention to them. It's like, no, that's exactly wrong. The things you do every day, those are the most important things you do, hands down. Lay a disciplinary structure on yourself, get the chaos in check, and then you can move towards a state that's freer. It's discipline first. Like, look, if you're going to become a concert pianist, there's going to be several thousand hours of extraordinarily disciplined practice. That's the imposition of order on your potential, let's say. But what comes out of that is a much grander freedom. And so in virtually every freedom that you have in life that's true freedom is purchased at the price of discipline.
There's this saying that says, tough times produce strong men produce good times produce weak men produce tough times.
Yes.
If that's the truth, which phase are we in today?
Well, if you think about it historically, you have to say that we're in good times. I mean, that doesn't mean everything about the current times are good, and of course life is always tenuous and difficult, but it's 1919. If you go back 100 years ago, imagine what the last 5 years would have been like, right? You would have been, the entire world was encapsulated in a terrible war. The trench warfare was absolutely brutal, and that was a 5-year period, and then that was followed by the Spanish influenza, which killed 120 million people. And you know, so I'd rather be here now than there then by a substantial margin. And I think life is never easy, even under relatively positive conditions, but I would say that speaking on a global level, there's never been a better time for the majority of people to be alive. And the future, although we're vulnerable and terrible things can always happen to us, it's hard to make a case that the future doesn't look comparatively positive. We're becoming extremely technologically sophisticated, and the world is changing at an incredibly rapid rate, and the only way we're going to be able to manage that in a positive way is if each of us, or as many of us as possible, are capable of making wise and careful and truthful decisions. And if we do that, then, you know, maybe things can continue to improve. Imagine someone that you treat well, that you love. Then try to treat yourself that way. You got to detach from yourself a bit. You got to think, okay, well, I'm a person among other people, and I deserve at least as much respect as a person among other people, and I should be trying to help myself across time. And instead of being self-contemptuous and self-destructive, I need to take care of myself as if I'm potentially valuable, and to lay out my life that way. And so that's what that chapter is about. And it's hard for people, you know, they don't take care of themselves as well as they should. And I don't mean, you know, take care of yourself. I mean, that isn't what I mean. It's like, it's not a moralistic attack. It's like, it's an encouragement to give yourself a bit of the benefit of the doubt. Take care of your room, take care of your things, like have some respect for yourself. It's like there is a lot of potential within you, and there's many things that you can do, and you're necessary more than you think to the unfolding of things. Like if you make a bunch of bad decisions, things get worse, not just for you, like things get worse. And so it matters what you do, and so part of what you do is you want to treat yourself as if what you do matters. And so you want to have some respect for yourself.
You have to be tough as a damn boot to be good, because you have to stand your ground when you need to stand your ground, and you have to be able to say no when it's time to say no, and you have to mean it. And so then you have to think and plan strategically so that when you're going to say no, you can mean it and it will stick. You know, and that takes a certain amount of integrated malevolence, I would say. And once it's integrated, it's not malevolence, it's strength. It's strength of character. It's the ability to stand your ground. And you have to cultivate that. And you cultivate that at least in part by telling the truth. And so you take your place in the world as a decent person and as a decent citizen, and you play the hierarchical game properly. And that is to stand up straight with your shoulders back. It's like the world's an onslaught. You've got the tyranny of culture to deal with. You've got the catastrophe of nature. You've got your own damn malevolence and ignorance, right? All coming at you, plus the incredible, complicated, indeterminate potential of the future. That's all coming at you, and it's all your responsibility. And you can cringe away from it and be afraid of it and be victimized by it and be bitter and cynical about it. And no wonder, because it can be painful. Or you can turn around and you can say, man, bring it on, because there's more to me than there is to the catastrophe. And this is what I discovered from looking at what I looked at. I looked at the darkest things I could look at, really, for 30 years. I was really a lot of fun to be around, I can tell you. I looked at the darkest things that I could think of, right? Not only what happened in Auschwitz and what happened in the Gulag, but personal issues. You know, it's like I wasn't so much interested in the totalitarians as a group. I was interested in the people who undertook the terrible acts that the totalitarians required. You know, the people who, I was just rereading Ordinary Men, and it was a story about a police battalion in Poland that trained ordinary policemen to take naked pregnant women out into the fields and shoot them in the back of the head. It takes a lot of training, by the way, before you can bring yourself to do that. And you aren't the same person by the end of it. It's pretty goddamn horrific. You know, and I was trying to figure out, what would it be like to be that person? Because we are that person. And then what would it be like to not be that person, right? To refuse to do that, to not participate in that. You know, and what I discovered by making that totalitarian proclivity personal was that There's more to us than there is to the horror. As nature is, bent on our destruction, bad as culture is, tyrannical and bloody, back as far as you can look, as malevolent as you are in the darkest part of your heart, and that's plenty malevolent. The possibility that's within you that can well up, the courage and the truth and the ability and the skill and the willingness to set things right, if you are willing to set them right, is more powerful than all of that. And so it's so interesting. It was proof for me of an old saying I read from Carl Jung. It's an alchemical motif, in stir qualinus inventur, which is what you most want to be found will be found where you least want to look, essentially. And it's so interesting because it means that if you're willing to turn around and to stand up straight and face the darkness like fully, what you discover at the darkest part is the brightest light. And that's something that's so much worth discovering, because there's going to be terrible darkness in your life. And it's going to make you cynical and bitter. And it could easily be that you're just not looking at it enough. Because if you looked at it enough and you didn't shy away and you brought everything you had to bear on it, you'd find that there was more to you than there was to the horror. You know, I watched my father-in-law. I'll end with this. And you know, you don't know, because you're not bringing your A game to the table with all that cynicism and bitterness and resentment and willful blindness and avoidance. Maybe you're playing at 60%. It's not good enough because there's too much of what's bad for 60% to be good enough. It's like you need 90% or 95% or 100%. When about 15, 20 years ago, my mother-in-law developed frontal temporal dementia, which I wouldn't recommend. You know, it's one of those degenerative neurological diseases like Alzheimer's, and those bloody things are like they're in the top echelon of awful. You know, you watch a person deteriorate before your eyes. It's a lengthy, lengthy death. And it was slow. And her husband, he lived in this little town that I grew up in, about 3,000 people. And he was quite a character, man. Everybody knew him. I bought him a Foghorn Leghorn t-shirt once, because that's kind of what he was like. He was loud and sort of bombastic, but he stood up straight, I can tell you. And he played the fool a little bit, mostly for the amusement of people, but he was no damn fool. And I always admired him and liked him. And the feeling was mutual, thank God, since I married his daughter. And, you know, he drank a lot with his crazy friends up in northern Alberta, and he wasn't at home a lot because he was working a lot. And you know, he was kind of a party animal about town, but a good businessman and a good man. And then his wife got sick, and they moved to another town. And, you know, he took care of her for like 15 years. It was unbelievable as she deteriorated, you know, and she got more desperate to have him around, and her love for him never went away. Even as she lost herself almost completely, she would always light up when he came into the room, you know. And he took care of her right till within weeks of her death. He had to finally put her in an old folks' home because he was no longer strong enough to lift her up from the chair. And we interacted with him a lot, you know, because we were trying to help him figure out how to cope. And we had signs put up in the house, electronic signs that would tell her when he was leaving, so that she would know where he went. And we had recordings in the bathroom so that she knew what to do when she went into the bathroom. And we tried to do everything we could to not make this absolutely bloody, atrocious experience complete hell. And he participated the whole way, you know, and it was really something to see. It was really it left me with a tremendous sense of admiration for him, but not just for him, but for people who can do that, you know. And if there was a new decline, he took it on, and he didn't complain about it, and he tried to do what he could, you know. And like, it was no picnic, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't hell. And then we were all gathered around the deathbed, my wife's mother's deathbed, and the family was there, and they got along pretty well, you know. And her sister's a palliative care nurse, and the other one's a pharmacist, and none of them are particularly afraid of of illness and death. You know, they're a pretty tough group. And so, you know, they made sure their mother's lips were wet while she was no longer eating or drinking, and tried to make her comfortable. And they were around the deathbed, and they were kind of getting along, you know. It wasn't Family Feud at mother's death time, and that was kind of nice. And she died, and that was that. But it wasn't just that, because the fact that the family had coped with it well and nobly and honorably, I would say, brought them together. They were closer afterwards than they were before. And they all had more respect for their father. And then in the old folks' home, he met another woman who had a husband there who had Alzheimer's. And they got to know each other, you know. And he died after a while, and she died after a while. And then a few months later, they started going out. And then eventually they had a relationship, and now they live together. And so he gained something. Like, it wasn't that he replaced what he lost, you know what I mean? Because he still has pictures of his wife up in his house, and she was the love of his life, and that's not going away. But, you know, his family respected him more, and everybody pulled together more, and it wasn't hell at the deathbed, it was just tragedy, and the family pulled together more. And that was a good example of how you can extract at least a certain amount of light out of what's dark, even at a personal level. And it's worth asking yourself. It's like, drop what you're doing that's foolish, that you know is foolish, and pick an aim that's worthwhile, you know, to make things better for yourself, like you're worth taking care of, like you're worth something, you know, and to surround yourself with people who believe the same, and who are rejoicing in your accomplishments and unhappy when you fail, right? And you're comparing yourself to your accomplishments of yesterday and not to someone else's today, so that you're not jealous and bitter. And you put your own house in order so that you're not cursing the world when some of its disarray might be your fault. And you're trying to pursue something meaningful, and you're doing your best to tell the truth, and all of that. And then you see what happens. Who the hell are you? You know, you think you're a miracle of some bloody bizarre sort. We've been around for 3.5 billion years. You know, every single one of your relatives propagated successfully. And here you are, against all possible odds, in this world of hell in some sense, and bitterness and tyranny and malevolence. And yet, God only knows what's inside you, this capacity for consciousness, the capacity to confront potential and to turn it into something good. That's us, man. That's the Western story. That's the individual as the cornerstone of the state. That's our responsibility, and it really is who we are.
So one of the pathways that's on display with regards to the formulation of an identity, let's say, is this injunction, which is really a temptation to love yourself. So we should take that apart. Now, the first question might be, well, what do you mean by yourself? And one answer to that is the person I am now. And you should love and feel good about the person you are now. And that's actually a dubious proposition for a variety of reasons. One is, whatever yourself is not only what you are. Yourself is also what you could become, and what you will and could become. And so to love yourself properly is not only to love what you are, who you are, whatever that means, but to love who you could become. Now, one of the things I've observed is that it's very demoralizing, let's say, for the typical young man. It's true for the typical young woman as well. So we'll say the typical young person who's miserable and maladjusted psychologically and socially, if you just go to them and say, well, you should feel good about yourself, because they think, you're good just the way you are. You're perfect just the way you are. You should accept yourself just the way you are. It's like, well, okay, so what does that say about who I should become? Is that just now off the table because I'm already good enough in every way? So am I done or something? What about who I should become? And then, well, how should I feel good about myself when I don't? Because I'm not getting along with myself. I'm anxious and hopeless and nihilistic and depressed. And I'm not getting along with other people. So how is it that that's all somehow something I should feel good about without being deluded? And these are complicated questions because you don't want to beat yourself with a stick, which might be the opposite of that as well. Feel bad about yourself. It's like, no, be judicious and merciful with yourself and think that you need to accept yourself in some way, the way a mother accepts a child. But the maternal spirit is not the only spirit that governs the love that a child requires properly. You have the paternal spirit of encouragement as well, which is, well, we need to shelter and protect you and to provide for your security the way you are, but you could be a lot better and should be, and I have faith that you could be, which is the love that I'm delivering to what you're becoming rather than what you are. And so love that you direct towards yourself is partly directed towards that maternal care that's sort of the minimum precondition for basic flourishing, combined with an attitude of encouragement towards the possibilities of your being. And so that's a much more sophisticated so-called self-love, partly because it's the kind of love that envisions you as something that unfolds across time. And it's a much richer conception because it also implies that there's a responsible adventure to your life. Like you're not all you could be, and there's pain in that. And there's the necessity for a certain amount of judgment about that, and even a certain amount of exclusion, because what you are that is insufficient in some sense should not be allowed to propagate further. But if it's conjoined with encouragement, it's like, yeah, you're in a rough situation there, kiddo, but here's some things about you that are virtuous and good, and they're pretty powerful actually. And if you just made those more manifest, you could dispense with a lot of this immaturity and misery, and you could expand yourself out into life physically and psychologically, and you could start walking this pathway that makes things better. And the thing is that as soon as you start walking the pathway that makes things better, then things immediately become better because your whole orientation changes. And if you're in a bad place but you're escaping, that's pretty positive, even if it's a bad place. And you might think, well, it's still bad, but it's better. It's like, well, that's a lot better than a bad place that's getting worse. That's for sure, because that's hell. Hell is a bad place that's getting worse. That's for sure. And so if you take the bad place and it's getting better, well, it's already not hell. That's a start. And so this notion of love, we've confused this with the maternal instinct for an infant. It's like, because an infant under 6 months is like, well, of course, your attitude towards an infant is you're exactly okay the way you are, in the sense that there's nothing to do with an infant under 6 months in the most fundamental sense, except to provide them with total care. But that's not what you do to any child that's older than 6 months. You start laying down some criteria for becoming, for improvement. And some of that improvement, because we could define it, well, there's nothing more perfect than a child, than a baby. It's like, yeah, but that's not true if the baby's 14 years old, right? It's true if the baby's 6 months old and actually a baby. But by 9 months, well, the child is going to start to interact socially. And now there's some principles that the child has to learn to abide by so that social interaction is optimized. And then you want to replace the infant with the toddler, who has a certain domain of autonomy and responsibility and a certain capacity for social interaction. And you want to replace the toddler with the young child, with the preschooler, who now can negotiate a shared social space. And you want to replace the preschooler with the older child, who's now capable of taking on as much domestic responsibility as is appropriate for that age. You want to take the infant who's entirely dependent and turn them into something that's autonomous and then socially integrated, and then socially integrated in a manner that's moving them towards individual responsibility. And the love is not only love that's devoted to what they are at any point, which is that encompassing maternal love, say, but the love that says, yeah, kid, we're pretty happy you're around, but the new you is going to even be better. And that's encouragement, and that's part of love. It's half of love, that's for sure. And you want to direct that to yourself as well. It's like, you don't want to judge who you are so harshly that you just destroy yourself and everything is cast into the pit. you want to take a look at yourself and say, look, you know, you're a person among persons, and you have intrinsic worth, and you have your flaws, your sins, your domain of ignorance and inadequacy, but that doesn't mean that you're entirely worthless because of that. You have a base level value. That's intrinsic worth, let's say, that's reflective of the fact that you're made in the divine image in the most fundamental sense. You have intrinsic worth, and that's due a certain degree of baseline love. But there's the becoming problem. It's like, well, especially when you're young, most of you is still in the becoming phase. And so why wouldn't encouragement be the hallmark of love? It's like, get the hell up, get your act together, adopt some responsibility, put your life together, develop a vision, expand yourself beyond the narrow confines that are causing your misery. And we think you can do it. You could do it, you should do it, the world would be better off if you did it, you'd be doing better if you did it, everything would work out better. Why would we not work to make everything work out better? And you're the person who could do it. And you tell young people that, and they think, well, no one ever told me that before in that way. And they think, well, maybe I should get my act together. And then they go out and try to get their act together in some micro ways, and they think, well, turned out that worked, and I'm less miserable. I could try doing it a little bit on a broader scale. And they try that, and they think, wow, people seem a lot happier with me. I have more friends, and I'm more popular, and I'm a little more physically attractive because I'm standing up a little bit straighter. And then away they go. And why would you, unless you believe that human being is corrupt and pathological in its essence, which many people now seem to believe, or at least some dread spirit seems to insist, and people agree with it. If you don't buy that, then you think, well, yeah, you unfold, man. Unfold all those manifold possibilities that lurk within, and be a force for good in the world, and that'll be the adventure of your life. And I guess we could also add to that a bit of a disquisition on truth. So you should be oriented by love, and you could say, well, that's the desire to care for being and becoming, however it's manifest, to want that to turn out in the best possible manner. That could be your goal. I want things to turn out in the best possible manner. And you have to decide if that's true, because people are tempted to create little hells around them all the time. So don't be thinking that necessarily you want that, because it's not that easy to orient yourself so that that's all you want, because you're bitter and resentful and angry. And so all of that's going to interfere with that vision of love. And then you might say, well, now that you have that vision, what do you have as weapons to clear your path, let's say, or to set things in order as you move forward? And one of the answers to that is, we have truth. Well, why? Well, because you want to contend with the world the way it is, obviously. So truth is going to be useful in that endeavor. And then you might say, well, if I could get away with something by not telling the truth, why shouldn't I just lie? If I could get what I wanted, and if I could avoid responsibility, why not lie? And the first answer is, well, what makes you so sure you want to avoid responsibility, except narrowly in this moment, because it's not a good medium to long-term strategy, and everyone knows it. And what makes you think that manipulating people in the short term so that you can gratify a whim is going to be a useful iterative strategy? It's like, it's not. So you can dispense with that. And so what do you do when you tell the truth? Instead, is you predicate your actions on an axiom of faith, which is that nothing better can happen than that which happens if you live in truth. And that's a statement of deep religious faith, because the evidence for that can only be gathered as a consequence of manifesting the actions that are predicated upon that axiom of faith. You don't know till you lay it out. But you can say, well, I believe that the truth will set me free. And then you think, well, the truth will set me free. Who's me? Back to identity. Well, if you're lying, it's not you by definition, because if you're lying, you're attempting to implement a falsehood. You're attempting to falsify the world and yourself. That's what a lie is. And so if something happens that's good because you lied, it's not happening to you. It's a reward for the spirit of deceit that you allowed to inhabit you. And if you reward the spirit of deceit that you allowed to inhabit you, it will grow. And I would not recommend that. That's a very bad idea. In the contrary situation, you live and speak in truth, and then things happen. They're happening to you. That's your life, man. That's your adventure. And one of the things that's very interesting about the truth in that regard is that it provides a certain optimal unpredictability. You know, if you're talking to someone, you think maybe you're being interviewed, or maybe you're having a discussion with someone, you think, I'd like to impress this person. It's like now you have a little vision of what the instrumental outcome of the conversation could be, so that it reflects positively on some narrow conception of a desired future state. I want this person to be impressed with me, so I'm only going to say things they want to hear and that sound impressive. That's all lies. It's like, well, maybe you'll get that result, but it won't be what you want because it's predicated on a falsehood. Instead, you could just have a conversation with the person, like a real conversation. It's like, what do you think? Here's what I think. Do you like it or not like it? It's like, well, I don't know if you like it or not like it. It's like, we can talk about that and why, but it's still what I think. And that doesn't mean it's right, but it's what I think. Well, then you lay that out, and then what happens to you is what happens to you. And then it's unpredictable, because imagine you're speaking deceitfully and instrumentally. You want something from someone. Okay, well then you're lying, so the you that receives is not you. It's the spirit of deceit. And it's also, you're instrumental because you think that that narrow vision is optimal, even though it requires deceit. You can just throw that away and you can say, well, I'm going to say what I think, carefully and judiciously, feeling out the words, and then I'm going to accept whatever happens, no matter how unpredictable. And then what you'll find is that's where you have adventure. Because you might ask too, well, what do you have to offset against the catastrophe of life? Responsibility, friendship, place, job, career, education, all of that. Adventure. Adventure. Is the adventure worth it? Well, if you tell the truth, you will have the adventure of your life. That's what will happen.
One of the things Solzhenitsyn said about hedonism, he said, the doctrine that life is for happiness is invalidated by the first sound of the jackboots kicking into your door. And so then the question is, well, what do you do in the face of suffering when your philosophy is hedonic, is hedonistic? And the answer is collapse. And that means that happiness as an aim is shallow and weak. It cannot withstand suffering. Obviously, because when you're suffering, you're not happy. And if the purpose of life is to be happy, then suffering, when you're suffering, your life has no meaning. And then if you're suffering and there's no meaning in the suffering, then you're really suffering. That's really hell. But then you think, and this is something that's really heartened me. I talk to my audiences, especially to the young men, say, look, first of all, don't aim at being happy, because that's just not going to work, especially when the storms come and barbarians are beating at the gate. You can just forget about that. And there's going to be times in your life where you're suffering so much you can't believe it. And so you're going to need something a hell of a lot more robust than happiness to get you through that. And then you might say, well, what's more robust than happiness? Or maybe even what's more robust than pain? And then you could say, well, how about adventure? How about adventure? How about we go out and sail the uncharted seas, you know? How about we go and, Jesus, I talked to a guy the other day. He's a driver for me down in Nashville, where I am, ex-military guy, special forces guy, tough as a bloody boot, now works as a cowboy out in Montana, you know, a real character, perfect bloody American archetype. He knew he wanted to be in the special forces when he was 5. So I talked to him for like half an hour trying to figure out what motivated him, you know? And he told me probably 10 stories about his life, all very colorful and deep anecdotes, battle and rescue and physical privation and discipline. And every 10 minutes he said, I was looking for a new challenge. And then I was looking for a new challenge. And then I'd already done that, so I was looking for a new challenge. And for him, life was nothing but a sequence of impossible mountains to climb. And that's exactly what he wanted. And that's what I think we all want. You know, in the story of Abraham, when Abraham is perfectly happy in his father's tent, eating peeled grapes and, you know, having his diapers changed, even though he's 80 years old. And God calls him out to adventure. And it's very catastrophic, right? Because Abraham encounters tyranny and starvation and war and conspiracy to steal his wife and his own proclivity to lie cowardly. And this is all like that's his first sequence of adventures. And you think, well, what the hell's going on here? It's certainly not the case that God called him out to be happy. And I think the right moral to draw from that story is that God, so to speak, has called us out for something far greater than mere happiness. So much greater than happiness that happiness pales in comparison. He's called us out for the adventure of our life that's of sufficient moral integrity to justify the suffering. And that's something. And if you tell people that, if you let them know that, well, that makes them stand up and cheer, because deep in their heart, they know that's true. They're hearing that spirit of adventure calls you to be a patriarchal despoiler of the planet. And that demoralizes young men. And that's, of course, exactly the point, because demoralized young men aren't oppressors, although, yes, they are. And they're not despoilers of the planet, although, yes, they are. And so happiness, it's like, that's just, happiness is a side effect of moral venture, and if it comes along, you should be bloody thrilled. But as an aim, it's for narcissistic 3-year-olds as an aim.
So, one way of conceptualizing yourself is that you're one speck of dust among 7 billion. And when you conceptualize yourself that way, you might think, well, what difference does it make what I say or do? And that's actually quite convenient for you, because if it doesn't matter what you say or do, then you don't have any responsibility and you can do whatever you want. The price you pay for that is a bit of nihilism, but if you don't have to shoulder any responsibility, that's a small price to pay. That's the underground motivation for nihilism. But the other way of looking at it, and this is actually the accurate way of looking at it, is that you're in a network. You're a node in a network, and so you can do a little bit of arithmetic very rapidly and just figure out how powerful you are. You know 1,000 people. You're going to know more than that over the course of your life, but let's say 1,000 for the sake of argument for now. They know 1,000 people. That means that you're one person away from 1 million people and 2 persons away from 1 billion people. And you're the center of that network. And now the way networks work is that information propagates in a network manner. So don't underestimate the power of your speech. Now, Western culture is phallogocentric. Let's say it. Okay, so we'll say, yeah, that's just fine. That's exactly what it is. It's predicated on the idea of the logos, that the logos is the sacred element of Western culture. And what does that mean? It means that your capacity for speech is divine. It's the thing that generates order from chaos and then sometimes turns pathological order into chaos when it has to. Don't underestimate the power of truth. There's nothing more powerful. Now, in order to speak what you might regard as the truth, you have to let go of the outcome. You have to think, all right, I'm going to say what I think, stupid as I am, biased as I am, ignorant as I am. I'm going to state what I think as clearly as I can, and I'm going to live with the consequences no matter what they are. Now, the reason you think that's an element of faith. The idea is that nothing brings a better world into being than the stated truth. Now, you might have to pay a price for that, but that's fine. You're going to pay a price for every bloody thing you do and everything you don't do. You don't get to choose to not pay a price. You get to choose which poison you're going to take. That's it. So if you're going to stand up for something, stand up for your truth. It'll shape you, because people will respond and object and tell you why you're a fool and a biased moron and why you're ignorant. And then if you listen to them, you'll be just that much less like that the next time you say something. And if you do that for 5 years, you'll be so damn tough and articulate and able to communicate and withstand pressure that you won't even recognize yourself. And then you'll be a force to contend with. And you don't get to wait until, because I get letters like Gad Saad gets all the time too, from faculty members in particular, and they say, well, when I get tenure, it's like, then they think, well, when I'm an associate professor, and then they think, well, when I'm a full professor. It's like, if you're a professor already, you're like the most protected person in the history of the planet, and you need, well, okay, but one of the things that indicates is that it's almost impossible to provide people with enough protection so that they feel safe to speak. Okay, so we'll address that directly. It is not safe to speak, and it never will be. But the thing you got to keep in mind is that it's even less safe not to speak. Right? It's a balance of risks. It's like you want to pay the price for being who you are and stating your mode of being in the world, or do you want to pay the price for being a bloody serf, one that's enslaved him or herself?
Well, that's a major price, man. That thing unfolds over decades, and you'll just be a miserable worm at the end of about 20 years of that, right? No self-respect, no power, no ability to voice your opinions, nothing left but resentment because everyone's against you, because of course you've never stood up for yourself. It's like, say what you think carefully, pay attention to your words. The price is, it's a price you want to pay if you are willing to believe that truth is the cornerstone of society. And in the most real sense, if you're willing to take that leap, then tell the truth and see what happens. And nothing better could possibly happen to you. There'll be ups and downs, and there'll be pushback, and there'll be controversy and all of that, but it doesn't matter. The truth is what makes the world, the truth is what redeems the world from hell, and that's the truth. And we saw plenty of hell over the last 100 years, you know, and we haven't learned a bloody thing from it. It's like, wake up, tell the truth, or at least don't lie. That's a start. And you got to understand that's a risk. But I have one more brief thing to say about that. So, you know, I said what I had to say back in September, and I'm sure that I could have done it better, and many people have told me how I could have done it better, although it didn't mean they would actually do it, but and you know, my job was at risk, serious risk, for about 2 months, and it destabilized my family, who've been very brave about this, so like, thumbs up to them, man. They've just stood by me. But here's the optimistic news, is the university has left me alone completely. I shook hands with the dean 2 weeks ago. We're on friendly terms. They don't want this to go any farther than it has already. The students were tremendously welcoming when I came back to teach in January. I haven't had a single negative incident at the university. And I've received thousands of letters from people all over the world, all of which have been in support. I've received 2 negative letters. That's it. 2. So the people have an inchoate longing to have the sort of thing that we're talking about articulated. And so don't be thinking you're alone. It's just that people can't talk, they're afraid to talk, or they don't know what to say. And those are real problems. So if you're reasonably articulate, like, start talking and sharpen yourself up. I mean, the enemy is a cloud. They're a cloud of gnats. They're only courageous in groups. They're only courageous in mobs. If you stand your ground and don't apologize and articulate things properly, they'll disperse around you like they're not even there. So most of it's illusion. So don't be afraid, but be afraid of the right thing. And the right thing you should be afraid of is not saying what you say, because that's the same as not being. And here you are, suffering away. You might as well be at the same time. At least then there's something to you. So.
Now, this young man told me that his life lacked purpose and direction and meaning, and that he was nihilistic until he read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which is a book I actually like quite a bit. I've read it 3 times at different decades of my life. And one of the things that's very interesting about that book is that it's an examination of the idea of quality, of the idea that there are qualitative distinctions between things, and that we have an instinct to make qualitative distinctions. And so a qualitative distinction is simply, this is better than that, which is a judgment. Okay, now what Ratzinger is hypothesizing is that the person in and of, you know how the modern idea is you're supposed to accept yourself. I think that's an insane idea, by the way. Really, I can't think of a more nihilistic idea than that you're already okay. It's like, no, you're not. And the reason you're not is because you could be way more than you are. And so what do you want to be? You want to be okay as you are? Or do you want to strive towards what's better? And this young man, this Australian, he said that the reason that Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance had such a impact on him was because he wasn't happy with his current mode of being, right? He didn't consider the manner in which he conducted himself sufficient. And the fact that the author of Zen, and it was Pirsig, laid out the notion that you could make qualitative distinctions, and there really was a difference between good things and bad things, or great things and evil things. It gives you direction. It gives you the possibility of moving upward. And Ratzinger is pointing out, at least to some degree, that human beings are insufficient in and of themselves and need the movement upward. And so they need to conceptualize something like the highest good and then to strive for that. And the thing is that there isn't any difference between conceptualizing the good and being judged. Because if you're going to conceptualize the good and move towards it, what you have to do is separate from yourself all those things that aren't good and leave them behind. And that's why the Redeemer and the Judge are the same thing. And one of the things that's really appalling, I think, about our modern world is that we're rejecting the notion of qualitative distinctions. You say, well, we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings by saying that one thing is better than another. It's like, okay, fair enough. It's not fun to be cast off with the damned, that's for sure. But if people are in fact insufficient in their present condition, which seems to be the case, I mean, try finding someone who isn't, then if you deny the possibility of qualitative distinction because you want to promote a radical egalitarianism, then you remove the possibility of redemption because there's no movement towards the good. And it seems to me that it's a catastrophe to sacrifice the good for, well, it's a catastrophe to sacrifice the good for the equal. Because for us to be equal would mean, as far as I can tell, that we would all be equally unredeemed and miserable.
There's so little emphasis in our popular culture, especially with regards to the so-called mainstream media, on discipline and responsibility, that there's a tremendous hunger for anything that pertains to that. And you have a right to be discussing that, I would say, because of your background, which, if nothing else, required a tremendous amount of discipline.
Yeah, and I ended up writing a book called Discipline Equals Freedom. And I'm lucky that I wrote it when I did, because if I would have written it 2 years later, everyone would have said, oh, everyone's talking about discipline now. So yeah, discipline, absolutely. Discipline does bring you freedom in life. And that's something that I kind of figured out over time.
So what do you mean by that? Like, how did you figure that out? And what do you mean by that? Because they're often, and you know, the classic sort of, what would you call it? Romantic rebel is someone who is free from excessive order, let's say. They see freedom and discipline as antithetical rather than seeing one as a precondition for the other. And so how did you learn that discipline was a precondition for freedom? If I've got the equation, how did that manifest itself in your own life?
So we'll start off by saying this. And look, I was a young kid. I joined the Navy to go in the SEAL teams. I went through SEAL training. I showed up at a SEAL team 1. And when I got there, and as I look back, this is a very powerful thing, even though it's very simple. So I'm 19 years old when I show up at SEAL Team 1. I'm done with the basic SEAL training. And I have a goal in my head, which is this. I want to be a good SEAL. Mm-hmm. That's what I want to do. That's like, I don't know about anything else. This is what I want to do. I want to be a good SEAL. That's what I want. I want to be a good SEAL. Mm-hmm. And so as a 19-year-old with all kinds of energy, and we haven't talked about my childhood yet, but I was kind of like a very rebellious kid. When you talked about seeing a kid that looked like you could have handed him a club or a battle axe and he would have probably been feeling a little bit better, I was like that. I was constantly looking around for a club or a battle axe because that's what I felt like I needed to do. And it was beautiful because I was running around the woods as a young kid playing Army. And I just went and actually played Army. That's what I ended up doing. So I never really had to force myself into some mold that I didn't want to be into. So I got to SEAL Team 1, and now I just want to be a good SEAL. That's what I want. And so now that starts steering some of my decisions. And for the most part, it steered my decisions in a decent direction. Now, there were some times where, as I look back now, what I thought was a good SEAL was a little bit off. But luckily it wasn't 180 degrees off. It might have been
Right.
off 30 degrees or 40 degrees.
Right.
And as I got older and more mature and I figured out more about what that ideal should look like to me, and I could keep chasing that ideal, that was good. But even to be a 19-year-old kid with a 70 or 80 degree corridor to move forward in is not a bad thing.
No, it's a gift.
It's a gift, exactly. So then I'm looking around at other SEALs that were older than me and more senior to me and trying to figure out which one of those guys is a good SEAL.
Yeah.
And what I realized was that the guys that were working harder, for the most part, were good SEALs. Now there's just some people that are just way talented.
Right.
And they could show up, 3 minutes before a run or 3 minutes before we do a shooting competition, and they could just walk through it, no problem.
Right.
And that's great for them. It wasn't me. I'm not that great at anything, but I saw other guys that might not be great at anything either, but they worked hard. They showed up to work early. They did the drills that they were supposed to do. They had discipline. And when you have
has amalgamated statistics, and I hope I get this right, but it's approximately correct. If you work 10% longer hours, you make 40% more money. Right. And so, and I think your comments about talent are also dead on. It's like in any field of enterprise, there are people who are phenomenally gifted. And then if they work really hard, they're even more phenomenally gifted, right? Those are the people who break records. But that talent apart, hard work actually works. And with virtually everything, it might not make you the best at whatever it is you're pursuing, but it will certainly make you better than you are. And then I have this new book. I hope you got a copy, because did you get a copy? Okay, so I'm bringing it up for a particular reason. I have a chapter in this book called, there's two that are relevant. Imagine who you could be and then aim single-mindedly at that. That's one. And then the course, or what would you call it? A complementary chapter is work as hard as you possibly can on one thing and see what happens. And that's also predicated on this idea that discipline is a precondition to freedom. So you were fortunate, like you had this goal, right? So that meant you had a goal, which is a really big deal because you could learn about goals. You had a sense of a higher mode of moral being, that I would rather be a good SEAL than the person I am now. Well, it's a code of behavior and a way of perceiving. So there's an ethic in that. And then you said as well, your conception of what good SEAL meant changed as you matured, but that's also fine. It wouldn't have changed unless you would have pursued that initial only partially accurate goal. And so that's also a really good thing for people to understand is like, if you don't know what you're doing, aim at something. Is it the right thing? No, but it's better than just shooting randomly. So you aim at something, and then as you aim and you move towards it, you're going to find out why you're wrong. And then you might recalibrate your aim. And that's going to happen over and over because as you move towards a goal, it recedes or it broadens or it recedes and broadens. And otherwise you'd run out of things to do.
Well, one of the things that I think can be really useful, and this is also a skill that will serve you well for the rest of your life, is to start using a schedule, like a Gmail calendar, and schedule in studying time, for example. Now, so I've got some thoughts about using a schedule. People often don't like schedules because it's like developing your own tyrant. It's okay, well, here's a whole bunch of things I have to do tomorrow. That's my schedule, and I better stick with it, or I'm a bad person, I'm a failure. And that's not the right way to go about it, the scheduling. What you want to do with the schedule is design the day that you would like to have. Now, some of that's going to involve responsibilities that you have to live up to, or your life will get worse, right? So, but I would say, if you're trying to start learning how to manage your school stress, is like, schedule in 10 minutes of homework. Maybe before you go to school in the morning, if you can get up. You probably can't because teenagers have a hard time getting up in the morning. But start with 10 minutes. See if you can train yourself to sit down for 10 minutes after dinner, some regular time, and do 10 minutes of homework. And that's it. Put that in there as a goal. And then maybe if you've done your 10 minutes of homework, you can schedule in, I don't know, 15 minutes of playing a video game if you want, some sort of reward. But start figuring out how to organize your day so that you get to do the things that you want to do, and you do some of the things that you have to do in a manner that you think you could actually do, in a manner that would be sustainable across time. And that, like, the part of your brain that makes you anxious is really unhappy if you don't have a plan. And so one of the fastest ways to start to deal with too much negative emotion, too much stress-related negative emotion, is to make a plan and to make it concrete. And so I would say, and a schedule is an unbelievably useful way of doing that. And you think, in my mind, well, in your mind, well, why am I filling out this calendar for the week? Well, so I know what I'm doing, so that I'm not anxious, so that I'm doing things I want to do, so I have something to look forward to, and so that I'm doing things that I have to do, so that my life doesn't go spiral downhill and make me more miserable and resentful and bitter. And so you can start to use a schedule as your friend, and like, that'll take a year of practice to get good at. So if it doesn't work well in the first week, don't give up. Just keep doing it until you get yourself disciplined and are able to stick more and more to your plans. And that will help you so much in your life, you just can't believe it. So what you want to do is chop up that overwhelming infinity into a set of manageable tasks. And you want to think, well, you know, some of those tasks might be like, well, maybe you could put some order into your room. You know, or maybe you could make your room a little bit more beautiful, or maybe you could think of one thing around the house that you could do that would actually be helpful. And you're doing that to improve your life. That's the point. You're not doing it because someone's shaking a stick at you and telling you that this is what you have to do if you're going to be a good person. That's not the point. And you also, with your schedule, you think, well, I'm going to design this schedule for someone I like. And that person that I'm designing the schedule for that I like is going to be me. And so it isn't the schedule of a slave master to a slave. It's a negotiated schedule that you arrange with yourself so that you can have a decent life. But it's a very powerful tool to have a calendar at your disposal. And if you can learn to use that young, just put a few things in it. Put in your classes, put in a few assignments, put in some things that you might want to do. Just start stupidly and badly, and you'll get good at it and assume you'll get good at it over about a year, and that'll change your life. Like if you learn to listen to people, if you decide that you're not going to say things that you know to be untrue, and if you learn how to schedule your time, your life will change for the better so much that you won't believe it, and that will keep happening more and more and more and more as you get older. So it's a great thing to start practicing if you could start practicing that when you're a teenager, and you get that under control by the time you're 18, you'll be absolutely deadly. You'll be so far ahead of other people who don't do any of that you won't believe it, and you'll just continue to accrue benefits as a consequence. Well, the thing is that, or one of the things is that, you know, you are going to be putting up with other people's problems and troubles for the rest of your life. And what you want to do is live your life in a manner that makes all of that tolerable. And so I would say, with the scheduling and with the attempt to speak honestly, and with the development of goals that are valuable to you, you're going to be occupied enough with your own life and see enough of the quality of that life so that you'll be able to tolerate a fair bit of noise and stress coming at you from other directions. And I would also say that the more that you put yourself together in the manner that we've already discussed, the better other people will treat you, and the less unnecessary suffering and distress that you're going to encounter. And I would say, and I'll close with this, I would say to your viewers, don't underestimate the utility of getting your act together. Another thing you can do is, and this is like deciding that you're going to stop saying things that you know not to be true. The other thing is, you could decide to stop doing things that you notice make you weak. And it's a game that you're playing with yourself. It's like you're out with your friends, you do something maybe because you think it'll make you popular, and you notice that makes you feel kind of subordinate and weak, and think, aha, I shouldn't do that again. I don't know exactly what it is that I did wrong, but it made me feel weak. It made me feel like I was coming apart at the seams. It's not the thing I should repeat. So you try to do things that make you stronger. You try to say things that make your speech more true and accurate. You try to aim at things that you think are worth attaining, and you get yourself disciplined and in order, and that will do. There's nothing else you can do in your life that will be of more benefit to you and to other people simultaneously. And if you could start that when you're a kid, man, I tell you, you'll be so far ahead. You'll be so far ahead by the time you're 18 or 19 that it'll be like you're in a different universe.
But the young men really need to hear this more, I think, is that you should be a monster. You know, because everyone says, well, you should be harmless, virtuous. You shouldn't do anyone any harm. You should sheath your competitive instinct. You shouldn't try to win. You know, you don't want to be too aggressive. You don't want to be too assertive. You want to take a back seat and all of that. It's like, no. Wrong. You should be a monster, an absolute monster, and then you should learn how to control it.
If you're harmless, you're not virtuous. You're just harmless. You're like a rabbit. A rabbit isn't virtuous. It just can't do anything except get eaten. It's not virtuous. If you're a monster and you don't act monstrously, then you're virtuous. But you also have to be a monster. Well, you see this all the time. Harry Potter's like that too. It's like he's flawed, he's hurt, he's got evil in him. He can talk to snakes, man. He breaks rules all the time. All the time. He's not obedient at all. But, you know, he has a good reason for breaking the rules. And if he couldn't break the rules, him and his little clique of rule-breaking, you know, troublemakers, if they didn't break the rules, they wouldn't attain the highest goal. So it's very peculiar, but it's a very, 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 very common mythological notion. You know, the hero has to be a monster, but a controlled monster. Batman is like that, you know. I mean, it's everywhere. It's the story you always hear.
Someone who is incapable of cruelty is a higher moral being than someone who is capable of cruelty. And I would say, and this follows Jung as well, that that's incorrect, and it's dangerously incorrect, because if you are not capable of cruelty, you are absolutely a victim to anyone who is. And so part of the reason that people go watch anti-heroes and villains is because there's a part of them crying out for the incorporation of the monster within them, which is what gives them strength of character and self-respect, because it's impossible to respect yourself until you grow teeth. And if you grow teeth, then you realize that you're somewhat dangerous, or maybe somewhat seriously dangerous, and then you might be more willing to demand that you treat yourself with respect and other people do the same thing. And so that doesn't mean that being cruel is better than not being cruel. What it means is that being able to be cruel and then not being cruel is better than not being able to be cruel. Because in the first case, you're nothing but weak and naive. And in the second case, you're dangerous, but you have it under control. And you know, a lot of martial arts concentrate on exactly that as part of their philosophy of training. It's like, we're not training you to fight. We're training you to be peaceful and awake and avoid fights. But if you happen to have to get in one, and I guess the philosophy also is that if you're competent at fighting, that actually decreases the probability that you're going to have to fight, because when someone pushes you, you'll be able to respond with confidence, and with any luck, and this is certainly the case with bullies, with any luck, a reasonable show of confidence, which is very much equivalent to a show of dominance, is going to be enough to make the bully back off. And so the strength that you develop in your monstrousness is actually the best guarantee of peace. And that's partly why Jung believed that it was necessary for people to integrate their shadow. And he said that was a terrible thing for people to attempt, because the human shadow, which is all those things about yourself that you don't want to realize, reaches all the way to hell. And what he meant by that was, it's through an analysis of your own shadow that you can come to understand why other people are capable, and you as well, of the sorts of terrible atrocities that characterized, let's say, the 20th century. And without that understanding, there's no possibility of bringing it under control. When you study Nazi Germany, for example, or you study the Soviet Union, particularly under Stalin, and you're asking yourself, well, what are these perpetrators like? Forget about the victims, let's talk about the perpetrators. The answer is, they're just like you. And if you don't know that, that just means that you don't know anything about people, including yourself. And then it also means that you have to discover why they're just like you. And believe me, that's no picnic. So that's enough to traumatize people, and that's partly why they don't do it. And it's also partly why the path to enlightenment and wisdom is seldom trod upon, because if it was all a matter of following your bliss and doing what made you happy, then everyone in the world would be a paragon of wisdom. But it's not that at all. It's a matter of facing the thing you least want to face. If you're going to be a fighter, you have to want to win. And you have to want to hurt people. I mean, not for the sake of hurting them. That's what makes you different than an evil person. But you have to have that capacity. You have to develop that. And, you know, that's the step on the way to enlightenment, weirdly enough, because that isn't what people think. People have been fed this diet of pablum, rights and impulsive freedom, for so long. There's just an absolute starvation for the other side of the story. There are no rights, technically speaking, without responsibilities. And all we've had for 60 years is a dialogue about rights. Well, that leaves a hole on the other side of the story. And it's a hole that's in people's hearts, essentially. Because responsibility, well, perhaps that's not more important than rights. Like I said, they're part and parcel of the same formula. But it's in responsibility that most people find the meaning that sustains them through life. It's not in happiness. It's not an impulsive pleasure. Those things blow away at the first ill wind. But to adopt the responsibility for your own well-being, and to try to put your family together, and to try to serve your community, and to try to seek for eternal truths and to live them, that's the sort of thing that can ground you in your life enough so that you can withstand the difficulty of life. And when you tell people that, especially when you include yourself in the audience, let's say, and you're not finger waving from above, then everyone knows that it's true. There's been this attempt to identify masculine competence and power, let's say, but mostly competence with tyranny, and that's very, very hard on young men. It's also hard on young women, for that matter, but it's very helpful for people to hear that they should make themselves competent and dangerous and take their proper place in the world, because it's the alternative to being weak. And weak is not good. The people who shoot up the high schools, they're weak. They're weak. And life is a very difficult process, and you're not prepared for it unless you have the capacity to be dangerous. That doesn't mean that you should be cruel. It doesn't mean any of that. There's a statement in the New Testament, the meek shall inherit the earth. But the meek isn't well translated. It means something more like, those who have swords and know how to use them but keep them sheathed will inherit the world. That's a way better way of thinking about it. You have to be powerful and formidable and then peaceful, in that order, right? And that's not the same as being naive and weak and harmless, which is what young men are being encouraged to be. It's like, that's a very bad idea. It's a very bad idea, because naive, weak, and harmless means that you can't withstand the tragedies of life. You can't bear any responsibility. You'll end up bitter. And when you get bitter, then you get dangerous. You don't treat adult men as if they're infants. You most want to find will be found where you least want to look. There's this old story that's from King Arthur, and King Arthur has these knights, right? They all sit around a round table, which means they're roughly equal. That's what the round table means. And they're off to find the Holy Grail, and the Holy Grail is the most valuable object. That's what it means. So they're off to find the most valuable thing, but they don't know what it is, and they don't know where it is. But they know that there's a most valuable thing, so in some sense it's akin to them orienting themselves by the star. And they don't know where to look, and so what they decide is, they have the castle, it's the middle of a forest, and so each knight decides to start looking for the Holy Grail by entering the forest at the point that looks darkest to him. And so what's the idea there? Well, imagine there are things that come easy to you, and that you're fond of pursuing, and that you're happy about pursuing. So you've found those and pursued them, and you've mastered them. So you know all that, but then there's another place that you don't want to go. And so you haven't gone there, and you haven't mastered it, and you're very small in comparison to it because you haven't mastered it, and so it has this monstrous aspect. If what you're doing isn't working, it's where you haven't gone that you need to go. And so I can give you another example of this. So let's say You're an agreeable person. And so you don't like conflict and you won't stand up for yourself. And you regard anger and the proclivity to provoke and to engage in conflict as something that's positively terrible. It's not only that you're not good at it, it's actually that it's wrong. So that's where you have to go if you're going to learn how to stand up for yourself. And imagine that you're afraid. Maybe you have something like agoraphobia. And so there's a whole bunch of things that you're afraid of, and you don't want to go there. But if you want to put yourself together, then that's exactly where you have to go. And so it's frequently the case that what you want to find is to be found where you least want to find it. And that idea is echoed in the prominent stories of dragons and gold. It's exactly the same idea. The dragon is this terrible thing. It's this terrible predatory thing that lives forever and is very, very wise. And it lives underground, and it'll kill you. It'll burn you up in a second. But it hoards gold. And so you have to go there into the dragon's lair if you're going to get the gold. And that's a representation of people's paradoxical relationship with reality. It's like you have to go out there and confront it in order to incorporate what it has to offer to you. But the probability that that's going to be intensely dangerous and push you right to the limit, first of all, those are actually the same thing. If it didn't push you to the limit, you wouldn't gain anything valuable from it. So you don't get one without the other. You don't get the gold without the dragon. That's a very strange, very, very strange idea. But it seems to be accurate. So all of that's lurking underneath this, in this imagery of the whale. Now, the whale, you can think of the story of Jonah. What happens with Jonah is that, roughly speaking, he's a prophet, and God tells him that he has to go to this city and straighten it out because it's veered off the path and it's heading towards doom. And Jonah thinks, I'm not going to that city to tell those people anything like that because they're not going to be very happy with me just showing up there and telling them, everything they're doing wrong. And so he hops on a boat and tries to get out of there. And then God conjures up this huge storm and the boat is about to be swamped. And Jonah admits that it's actually his fault because God's upset with him because he got this direct command to go straighten out the city and he ran off. And so they're not happy about this, but they throw Jonah overboard and the sea's calm and great fish comes up, a whale, and swallows him. And then he's down in the fish for 3 days and it throws him up on the dry land. And then he's learned his lesson by that time and he goes off to pursue his proper destiny. So that's echoed in this story as well, that if you don't follow the pathway that you're supposed to follow, the seas will become stormy for you and something will come up and pull you down and you'll be in a terrible place for some length of time till you learn your lesson. And if you're lucky, you'll get spit back up on shore and then you can go do what you should do. Well, that's not a lesson that anybody needs to have interpreted. I think everybody understands that.
Part of spiritual development is to recognize the satanic tendencies that characterize you and to fully wrestle with them and to integrate them. That's the thing. It's not so much to cast them away, it's to transmute them. And you can see the difference between people who've done that and people who haven't, at least to some degree, because people who haven't integrated the shadow at all are naive. And you can tell that when you look at them, and you can tell that when you talk to them. And because they're naive, they're often resentful as well because they get taken advantage of. And someone who's integrated that more, they're dangerous in the martial arts sort of way, which is they're dangerous, but they don't have to use it because their presence radiates implicit potential for havoc, and that's really necessary. It's one of the things that gives people self-respect.
You most want to find will be found where you least want to look. There's this old story that's from King Arthur, and King Arthur has these knights, right? They all sit around a round table, which means they're roughly equal. That's what the round table means. And they're off to find the Holy Grail, and the Holy Grail is the most valuable object. That's what it means. So they're off to find the most valuable thing, but they don't know what it is and they don't know where it is. But they know that there's a most valuable thing. So in some sense, it's akin to them orienting themselves by the star. And they don't know where to look. And so what they decide is they have the castle, it's the middle of a forest. And so each knight decides to start looking for the Holy Grail by entering the forest at the point that looks darkest to him. And so what's the idea there? Well, imagine there are things that come easy to you and that you're fond of pursuing and that you're happy about pursuing. So you've found those and pursued them and you've mastered them. So you know all that, but then there's another place that you don't want to go. And so you haven't gone there and you haven't mastered it, and you're very small in comparison to it because you haven't mastered it. And so it has this monstrous aspect. If what you're doing isn't working, it's where you haven't gone that you need to go. And so I can give you another example of this. So let's say you're an agreeable person. And so you don't like conflict and you won't stand up for yourself, and you regard anger and the proclivity to provoke and to engage in conflict as something that's positively terrible. It's not only that you're not good at it, it's actually that it's wrong. So that's where you have to go if you're going to learn how to stand up for yourself. And imagine that you're afraid. Maybe you have something like agoraphobia. And so there's a whole bunch of things that you're afraid of, and you don't want to go there. But if you want to put yourself together, then that's exactly where you have to go. And so it's frequently the case that what you want to find is to be found where you least want to find it. And that idea is echoed in the prominent stories of dragons and gold. It's exactly the same idea. The dragon is this terrible thing. It's this terrible predatory thing that lives forever and is very, very wise. And it lives underground, and it'll kill you. It'll burn you up in a second. But it hoards gold. And so you have to go there into the dragon's lair if you're going to get the gold. And that's a representation of people's paradoxical relationship with reality. It's like you have to go out there and confront it in order to incorporate what it has to offer to you. But the probability that that's going to be intensely dangerous and push you right to the limit, first of all, those are actually the same thing. If it didn't push you to the limit, you wouldn't gain anything valuable from it. So you don't get one without the other. You don't get the gold without the dragon. That's a very strange, very, very strange idea. But it seems to be accurate. So all of that's lurking underneath this, in this imagery of the whale. Now, the whale, you can think of the story of Jonah. What happens with Jonah is that, roughly speaking, he's a prophet, and God tells him that he has to go to this city and straighten it out because it's veered off the path and it's heading towards doom. And Jonah thinks, I'm not going to that city to tell those people anything like that because they're not going to be very happy with me just showing up there and telling them, everything they're doing wrong. And so he hops on a boat and tries to get out of there. And then God conjures up this huge storm and the boat is about to be swamped, and Jonah admits that it's actually his fault because God's upset with him because he got this direct command to go straighten out the city and he ran off. And so they're not happy about this, but they throw Jonah overboard and the sea's calm, and a great fish comes up, a whale, and swallows him. And then he's down in the fish for 3 days, and it throws him up on the dry land, and then he's learned his lesson by that time and he goes off to pursue his proper destiny. So that's echoed in this story as well, that if you don't follow the pathway that you're supposed to follow, the seas will become stormy for you, and something will come up and pull you down, and you'll be in a terrible place for some length of time till you learn your lesson. And if you're lucky, you'll get spit back up on shore, and then you can go do what you should do. Well, that's not a lesson that anybody needs to have interpreted. I think everybody understands that.
If you're suffering, you are obligated, in a sense, to hold on to whatever rope someone throws you. Life can be meaningful enough to justify its suffering. You can tyrannize yourself into doing things, but I wouldn't recommend it. What I would recommend instead is that you ask yourself what you're willing to do. It's a really effective technique. It's like a meditative technique. That's when life is worthwhile. I don't know exactly what's going to help you, but don't arbitrarily throw out any possibilities because you might not have that luxury. Antidepressants help a lot of people, and there are technical reasons why that's the case. If you're offered a gift by your society and it works, try it. I don't care what your presuppositions are. The time you see people who are suffering with depression, for example, there's a multitude of reasons, but I'll take one common reason. You could think about it as associated with the story of Peter Pan. Peter Pan is someone who won't grow up, right? Now, the problem with Peter Pan is he gets to be king, but it's king of Neverland. Neverland doesn't exist. So being king of nothing isn't that helpful.
Well, one of the things that you often see with people who suffer from depression, and I'm not making a blanket statement about the cause of depression because there's lots of them, is that people who don't have enough order in their life tend to get overwhelmed. So for example, if someone comes into me to see me and they say they're depressed, I always ask them a very standard set of questions. Do you have a job? If you don't have a job, you're really in trouble in our society. First of all, your biological rhythms tend to go off the rails right away because there's no reason to go to bed at any particular time and there's no reason to get up. And for many people, if they don't get up at the same time, they foul up the functioning of their circadian rhythms, and that's enough to make them depressed right off the bat, especially if they start napping during the afternoon. They also don't have a purpose. People aren't good without a purpose, and this isn't hypothesizing. We absolutely understand the circuitry that underlies positive emotion. When you're attending to something you're interested in and you're engaged in it, that's when you're alive. That's when life is worthwhile. It's so worthwhile that in those moments you don't even ask the question about it. The question itself goes away because the meaning that you're united with is so powerful that it can push back the adversity that would otherwise characterize life. Nietzsche said, the person who has a why can bear any how. We know how it works. Almost all the positive emotion that any of you are likely to experience in your life will not be a consequence of attaining things. It will be a consequence of seeing that things are working as you proceed towards a goal you value. That's completely different. And you need to know this because people are often stunned, for example. They finish their PhD thesis and their presupposition is that they're going to be elated for a month. And often instead they're actually depressed and they think, oh, what the hell, I've been working on this for 7 years and I handed it in and what do I do now? And that's what depresses them, right? It's the what do I do now? Well, they're fine if they enjoyed it, pursuing the thing. As long as it was working out, they get a lot of enthusiasm and excitement out of that because that's how our nervous systems work. Most of your positive emotion is goal pursuit emotion. If you take drugs like cocaine or amphetamine, the reason they're enjoyable is because they turn on the systems that help you pursue goals. That's why people like them. So if you don't have a job, you got no structure, that's not good. Plus, you tend not to have a point. So you're overwhelmed by chaotic lack of structure and you don't have any positive emotion.
Are you depressed or do you just have a horrible life? And those are not the same question, because if you're depressed, you have a life that in principle should work, but isn't. And so you come and say, look, I've got a lot of things going for me. You know, I've got a good job, I've got a good family, my wife loves me, but man, I'm miserable all the time. It's like, okay, well, let's delve into that a bit more deeply. But that kind of sounds like depression. But then you might come and say, well, I'm miserable, I'm suffering, I don't even want to be alive. And then I might ask, well, do you have an intimate partner? Well, no, not really. And I have had a history of catastrophic relationships. Do you have any friends? Well, you know, I have this one person I phone like once every month or so. But other than that, no, I don't really see anyone. Well, do you have any close family? No, my family's pretty fractured. I don't get along with my mom and dad. I don't see my sisters or my siblings much. It's like, well, how about a job or how about a career, or failing that, a job? It's like, well, I've always kind of been underemployed and I just lost my job and, you know, that's not going very well. And so on. You can walk through someone's life and you can find out if they're reasonably embedded in a hierarchy of social institutions. And if the answer is no, no intimate partner, no family, no children, no friends, no job, no career, no educational pathway, no engagement in civic responsibility, let's say, no church attendance, no spiritual life, no routine. It's like, well, you're not depressed, you just have a horrible life. Multidimensionally. Like, it's no wonder you're depressed. There's nothing in your life that is working. But it's interesting because that's not exactly a diagnosis at the level of the individual. It's a diagnosis in relationship to the relationship between the individual and this structure of containing social institutions. If you don't have an intimate partner and you don't have a family and you don't have any friends and you don't have a career or a job or any civic involvement or any involvement, let's say, with religious institutions,
and you don't have any creative striving, all you've got left is pain. And so that's what you have. And so here's a different way of thinking about sanity. Sanity isn't being well constituted as an atomized individual. Sanity is what makes itself manifest if you're properly situated in a hierarchy of social order. To be well constituted, you have to be a harmonious player in a multidimensional symphony in some real sense of social interaction. It's very hard to stay on the straight and narrow without a partner who doesn't share your blind spots, correcting you constantly. You know, now that's annoying. There's a tussling about it, right? There's a fractious and adversarial element to that, because if you're married, you don't see eye to eye, and thank God for that, because sometimes in your foolish insistence on being right, you're wrong, and wrong in a way that'll take you out. And so you better have a partner who doesn't think the same way you do. And fortunately, if you have a partner, you have a partner who doesn't think the same way you do. And so if you can get the dialogue flowing, then that's a mutually corrective mechanism. And so then you might say, well, the truthful dialogue between partners in a marriage is actually, it's the process by which sanity itself is generated. And I mean technically, it's like you're too complex to regulate yourself, period. And so you need other people to help you do that. So if you have a wife or a husband, someone who knows you and is there for the long run, they can help, you can help each other find the meaningful path and stay on it. And you can't do that alone. And probably just having a partner isn't enough. You need kids, likely, to keep you sane or to drive you crazy, depending on the nature of your children. Let's say you need family, you need your parents, you need your siblings, you need another community around you that's not merely your wife, because you're so crazy that it takes a village to keep you sane. And so, and then surrounding that more intimate web of kinship, you need friends. And friends keep you sane. Well, how? Well, you have to act in a manner that makes them want to be around you to have friends. And that means that to maintain your friendships, you have to be saner than you really are, right? They have to be able to enjoy their time with you. If you practice forthright and voluntary exposure to that which terrifies and dismays you, it transforms you. And we really know this as psychologists. We even know there's more and more evidence suggesting, for example, that if you imagine you adopt this attitude of voluntary confrontation, that changes you psychophysiologically. So much of the biochemistry of motivation and emotion is transformed when you take a stressor which could be oppressive and paralyze you and cause you to withdraw, and you reverse that and you decide to advance. It's like a different spirit inhabits you. And I mean this physiologically. There's a whole different pattern of being that makes itself manifest in you neurologically and psychophysiologically and pharmacologically. So you take it on as a challenge, right? And that transforms you at a cellular level too, because one of the things we've discovered in recent years is that if you do something new and complex, then that turns on that parts of your DNA that haven't produced proteins before will start producing new proteins and reconstruct you from the cellular level up. So it's a deep transformation, and we have no idea how deep. And again, you could ask yourself, if you didn't withdraw in fear from anything from everything that life threw at you, who could you become? And I would say that's the central religious question in some real deep sense. You know, are more things thrown at us than we can manage? Well, that's a tricky question, because pretty dreadful things are thrown our way. And you might say, well, that's just presents an insuperable barrier to progress. That's not very helpful, because you're alive, here you are, you got these problems to contend with, and if it's an impossible task, then how could you be anything but hopeless and desperate? But then you think, well, wait a second, how would things transform if I took this on as a voluntary adventure? You know, regardless of its scope, and the scope would include unjust suffering, death, and hell. And that's not just some religious or metaphysical vision. It's like, no, you're actually going to have to contend with that in your life, in whatever way those things make themselves manifest to you personally. That's coming, man. And so maybe you better get prepared. And then the question might be, well, what would happen if you got prepared? And the answer might be, you'd be prepared. And I think the religious enterprise in its deepest sense is that process of preparation. And you know, you might want to even push that a bit farther. You might say, well, not only do you want to get prepared for what's coming your way, but you want to be so prepared that when it comes your way, that it doesn't make you bitter and resentful and tempted by the desire to walk the path that would make all of that even worse. And so you might say, well, if you could really face up to what you need to face up to, not only could you turn yourself into someone that could bear the catastrophe of life and exposure to hell, but maybe you could turn yourself into someone who would still do good even while facing those things. And that's a pretty noble goal.
Life has proximal meanings, right? There's the meaning that you experience when you're engaged in a piece of art, or when you're reading, or when you're engrossed in a movie or in a conversation. There's the meaning that emerges within your relationships with people that you cherish or are enthusiastic with. There's meanings of security and predictability. There's meanings of duty and responsibility and active engagement with your job and your career. There's meanings of aesthetic pleasure. Now, all of those have their value, and each of them has their place. And you know, maybe there's a hierarchy of value there as well, so that some of those meanings are deeper than others. And then you might say, well, what characterized the deepest of all meanings? And it would be something like relationship with the transcendent, and that would establish a relationship between you and what's always been conceptualized as God, which is generally supposed to be something ineffable, right? It's not definable, but you might think about it as the central animating spirit of the age, or the value around which all other values are organized, or the wisdom of the ages, or the creative spirit that possesses you when you're inspired, or what grips you with enthusiasm at a sports event or at a musical event. All of those things. And we need a relationship with that, and we find our deepest meaning in that relationship. And if we don't find it, I think if we don't find it in something that's explicitly religious, then we tend to magnify something of lesser value, say something political, into that to fill the void. So yes, life has proximal meanings without God, without eternity, but at the ultimate level, something's lacking. And it's the desire to fulfill that lack, that, and maybe the lack itself, that's part and parcel of the religious instinct. So you can kill God, but you can't. That doesn't rectify the hunger for God. And then that hunger seeks out replacements. That's how it looks to me. So, and then, you know, you might also say, well, does that mean you have to believe in God? And I don't think of the proper answer to that is that you need to agree with a propositional statement. Does God exist? Yes. You know, like, is this table there? Yes. It's not that kind of
relationship. I mean, it's characterized in the Old Testament as a struggle. So Israel means those who struggle with God. And you have to participate in that struggle. And you can do that, weirdly enough, as a believer or as a non-believer. Maybe sometimes more intensely as a non-believer. The issue might be more paramount then, the issue of virtue and the issue of the ultimate orientation. If you're plagued by bouts of depression and anxiety, that does destabilize your identity. So it's almost by definition. But having said that, look, this is when habit and plan and strategy are so useful. So in the periods of depression that I've had, and some of them were long and certainly the most unpleasant experiences of my life. This is when you need a philosophy, let's say, that's allied with your vision and your strategy to sustain you. Because what would happen to me is that, I have a vision, and I suppose the vision is of a world that's better, that's less likely to descend into ideological catastrophe, and where people are more responsible and more awake and more educated and healthier. All of that, a vision of a better world, a world that's less hellish at least, but also a better world, and some sense of what role I might play in that. And so that's very motivating. Like, it's a profound goal to try to make things better. And you can do that locally. You can do that for yourself. You can do that for your family. You can do that for the broader community. And all of that's worth it, man. It's worth making some sacrifices for. It's worth suffering for to some degree. And then you decompose that into the day-to-day and week-to-week strategies and actions that you're undertaking, the plans and the activities that you're putting forward to make that dream a reality, to realize it. And then when the depression and anxiety come along, you think, part of it with depression, it's just bloody endurance. It's like you get up and you work through the next hour, you try to stay on track, you try to implement your strategic plans to the best of your ability, and you hope and you pray that you'll get through it. You'll get through it, and that the darkness will recede, and you stay on track. You eat even though you're not hungry. You get up even though you want to stay in bed. You interact with people even though you'd rather be alone. And it's the benefit of disciplined habits can sustain you. It's like the boat you're rowing in through a terrible storm, leaks and all, and maybe you'll be overwhelmed, but you have the boat and you can row forward, and that's what you've got.
It's known from multiple dimensions simultaneously that the system that produces happiness, let's say in the founder's sense, produces that emotion in relationship to the observation of movement towards a valued goal. And so you can derive some conclusions from that. The first is that without a goal, there's no happiness by definition, because happiness marks movement towards a valued goal. The next is, well, the higher the goal, the more value there is in the observation of movement towards it. And so out of that, you might ask, well, then what's the highest goal? Because why don't we go for that? Well, then you could say, well, you should do your best for the best. You might say, well, that's just to make me hedonically happy. It's like, well, wait a second, cocaine will work for that, because it actually even activates this system. But what about tomorrow and next week and next month? And so the problem with hedonism as a goal is, first of all, it vanishes when you're suffering. But even failing that, if you're serving yourself hedonically in the narrow sense, it's just about me and my pleasure. It's like, okay, which you? Today's you, tomorrow's you, next week's you, next month's you. What about next year, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? You're going to lead a hedonic and dissolute life, and what are you going to be, a burnt-out shell and a wreck, a dismal wreck in 10 years? Because that's what will happen. And so if you don't construe yourself as a community stretched out across time, then you're not even serving yourself. And if you do construe yourself as a community stretched across time, then serving other people and serving yourself turn out to be exactly the same thing. I just did a course on the Sermon on the Mount, and Christ, in one of the sections of that sermon, he says to people that you shouldn't lose your saltiness, you shouldn't lose your savor, and you're the salt of the earth, and without that salt, everything loses its flavor. And salt is a preservative, and it's a spice, and that's often conceptualized, that phrase, as referring to the salt of the earth, you know, the solid, reliable types who bear all burdens. But that is not what it means. I looked at a lot of different translations. I talked to a lot of people about that verse, and really what it means is, well, there should be some spiciness and unpredictability and humor about you. And there should be some play in the system, right? Because that's what stops you from just being the narrow, dead, past letter of the law with no spirit. There should be some snake inside the tree, right? There should be some fire inside the bush. Those are all ways of construing that are symbolically equivalent. There should be some dynamism in you, and a fair bit of that's associated with, well, enthusiasm. That's fun, but enthusiasm means to be imbued with the Spirit of God. That's why people like comedians so much too, because that's what they do. And so you have to leaven the duty with humor, and your book does a lovely job of that too, because your book, which is a very conservative book in the best possible way, and is a call to duty and responsibility, but you constantly return to themes of both stoicism and humor, which are tied together in some sense, you know. I was just in Newfoundland for the last week doing a documentary there, and Newfoundland's a rough rock, and it's beautiful and harsh. And the people there are tough and resilient, man, because they had to be. And Newfies have a great sense of humor, and they're always making fun. And that's a necessary leaven, right? That ability to deal with serious matters in a light with a light touch. And it's something I'm trying to learn to do more and more, even in the most serious of conversations, you know, because if you're a master, you've got both. You've got that light touch and that sense of humor. You really see that in military people who've been through rough situations. When you see someone in the depths of genuine suffering, hopefully what you're trying to do is to throw a lifeline. And one possible lifeline is compassion. And that's probably the right lifeline to throw an infant, you know, who's suffering. That sort of overwhelming compassion. But for someone who is an adult or making progress towards being an adult, the lifeline that might be thrown is there's something within you that would let you be more than you are, and much more, and maybe enough more so that you could actually deal with this suffering so it didn't turn into hell and take everything along with it. And there isn't anything more optimistic than that. You say something here, which I think is extremely, I'm going to read something from your book here. It is true that character is to some extent innate. I would say what that does is that it provides each of us with a range of talents and a range of temptations. And so it's something like that. So it's the hand we're dealt, and there's certainly a genetic element to that. Our genetic makeup imbues in us certain proclivities. But it is as true that character is mostly a consequence of choices. Strangely enough, we all make them, and we should make them deliberately, with the knowledge that these choices are part of our responsibility toward a purpose other than our own selfish aims. That responsibility is to your family, friends, community, and country. That's something that conservatives put forward as a pathway to virtue, you know. And what's so interesting about that, as far as I'm concerned, as an antidote to atomistic liberalism, let's say, that hyper-privileges the individual, is that it's definitely been my observation as a clinical psychologist that in the depths of misery, the capability that you have to be of service to other people, your family, your friends, your community, your country, that's actually a saving grace under such circumstances. You know, and that people really find a deep and abiding meaning in that service. So it's not just finger wagging and the pointing towards duty. It's like, no, you don't understand that if you're in desperate straits, if your life is falling apart, if you're nihilistic and miserable, and maybe you have your bloody reasons, because maybe you do, that's still the case that if you step outside yourself and you try to make the lives of other people better, that's the best possible thing that you can do for yourself.
And you know, people are very, 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 very tough. And it turns out that if you face things, that you can put up with a lot more than you think you can put up with, and you can do it without becoming corrupted. And she did recover quite fully, and much as a consequence of her own machinations, because she figured out what was wrong with her and then took the necessary steps to fix it, which is nothing short of a bloody miracle as far as I'm concerned. And anyways, part of the cat bit is, I actually start by talking about our dog, who actually died about a year ago, but he's still alive in the book. I let people know, because dog lovers love dogs, and if you love cats, then they think you don't like dogs, and then they don't like you. So I also point out at the beginning of the chapter that, if you want to pet a dog on the street, that's okay too, so you don't have to get up in arms about it. But the idea is that, you have to be alert when you're suffering. You have to be alert to the beauty in life, the unexpected beauty in life. And that's kind of what I was trying to get across with the idea of the cat. There's this cat that lives across the street from us called Ginger, and Ginger's a Siamese cat. And cats really aren't domesticated, technically speaking. They're still wild animals, but they kind of like people. God only knows why, but they do, And so Ginger will come wandering over, and our dog looks at her, but they're friends, and she rolls over on his back, and Seiko used to, nose her a bit, and then she'd kind of mosey over and let you pet her if she was feeling like it that day. And, you have to look for that little bit of sparkling crystal in the darkness when things are bad. You have to look and see where things are still beautiful and where there's still something that's sustaining. And, you narrow your time frame and you be grateful for what you have, and that can get you through some very dark times, and maybe even successfully if you're lucky. But even if unsuccessfully, then maybe it's only tragic and not absolute hell. And you can do that, in the worst situation. You can make it only tragic and not hell. And there's a big gap between tragedy and hell. There's nothing worse at a deathbed than to see the people there fighting. The death is bad enough, but you can take that, as terrible as it is, and make it into something that's absolutely unbearable. And maybe I think, and this is sort of what I closed the book with, this idea is that if we didn't all attempt to make terrible things even worse than they are, then maybe we could tolerate the terrible things that we have to put up with in order to exist, and maybe we could make the world into a better place, and it's what we should be doing and what we could be doing, because we don't have anything better to do. And that's what the book is about, and that's the end of 12 Rules for Life.